what was the sanctions with the Russian fertilizer? Because when I looked it up, they were talking about that there's a lot of misconceptions around it, and it had a lot more to do. It was more of an indirect effect with the major shipping companies and insurers and banks more than it was with the actual fertilizer itself.
Well, I don't know where that information is coming from, but
yeah.
Okay, let's just go.
Yeah, no, you can run with it if you have something else on it. Like I said, I think kind of outlining what you see as the issue with the Russian fertilizer sanctions, I think, is like the best start, right? Because we all know that Russia was getting sanctions, right? Like I know for me, like, oh, you can't work with white label companies and marketing that are in Russia. It's illegal. So how does that affect like fertilizer farming, and then how that kind of goes downstream to restaurants and any other food, food company?
Well, let's kind of start off here. So, something, Jake, one thing that people don't really talk about out there in the news right now is, they're all in, and let me just turn this over real quick, and I'm going to be jumping back and forth on this topic, but it seems that people don't seem to understand the economy. They just want to blast our government. They want to blast everything without understanding the facts. And, our agriculture system is one of the least talked about problems out there. Everything from cow farmers to produce farmers to chicken farmers, it just goes on and on and on. And people do not understand what really took place. Now, it's been broken for years. I mean, farmers have had a hard time, stabilizing their farms and keeping them. They're losing more and more land they'd have to sell off in order to survive. And we'll get into that part later on. But what people don't understand during the Biden administration, and I'm not trying to make this political at all, but during the Biden administration, the minute Russia went to war with Ukraine, our problems really started to happen. And people don't understand, Russia was one of the world's largest importers of nitrogen fertilizers, potash fertilizers, phosphate fertilizers, all kinds of fertilizers. And when we try to produce these fertilizers in the United States, they're not only not organic, but they're very costly. Mm-hmm. So people don't understand that's where it started. And that's why, the prices of produce and food at the supermarket, you've seen increasing more and more day by day. And I don't know if this is something that you understood or anybody out there understands. It starts with the fertilizer. Mm-hmm. They have to make sure the crops are growing, and they're, the production costs of corn, wheat production costs, soybean production costs, all this stuff goes up because wheat, corn, soybean, it's used in almost everything. Cornstarch, corn oil, feed. The production of corn goes on, and that's why the government does subsidize corn. They have for years. But it doesn't mean the costs are going to go up. I mean, corn is on everything. Cornmeal. I mean, everything you buy has corn in it. So does wheat.
Yeah.
So basically, how did this affect the farmers? Higher pay rises. Prices went up. Reduced fertilizer applications. Basically, they couldn't fertilize as much of their land as they wanted to. Basically, fewer crops.
But isn't it really part of that scalability question? Because I follow a bunch of smaller, we'll call them farmer or homesteading type influencers. Like I showed you one of the guys who he has like a larger farm operation, and he talks about it all the time, where he goes like, look, like I can't scale to a level where I could put chickens in every single grocery store in this regional area, because in order to do that, you have to, he called it cheap, right? Like you have to do something to increase productivity. Or not product. You have to do something to like make his chickens grow better, like bigger and faster and all that kind of stuff. But like you compromise on some stuff to get there. And it does feel like that kind of happens with plants too. And I say that because I'm just using social media here, but someone was showing them using a plastic lining on their farm stuff. And they go, look, it's just not realistic for the size of our farms to just put cardboard everywhere. Like we have to do it fast enough when we choose not to use herbicides. So is it really more possible that people are just really unaware of, in order for us to get food at this scale, these are the compromises that we have to make? Not compromise in terms of health, but like this is the stuff that we need to be able to fulfill that need, I guess is a better way to say it.
You know what? We could go on forever on this topic. and you can have a whole forum and seminars for days about this. And I've gone to seminars in Washington about this, about cow farming, and we are doing a better job at it.
Mhm.
The problem is it's about rising costs. You know, the biggest problem is you're looking at labor shortages right now on the farms, government regulations is just starting them, land prices and property taxes, which no one even thinks about or talks about, the consolidation of agriculture, the weather and climate risks. So the list goes on and on and on. And then you're looking at debt burden, commodity prices. You know, a farmer could only charge so much for his crops. It's like pennies on the dollar. You can't go over there and just say, okay, I'm going to charge more. You know, the government does regulate a farm. I mean, I've known in the past that, okay, they want to keep the prices regulated. So they're going to say, okay, you grew, let's just say 10 tons of onions this year. We only want 5, so burn the other 5. You know, it's not like we had such a great year. We're just going to throw extra onions out there. You know, they want to keep that money stable out there on the crops. And you're looking at the stock market also. You know, there's just too much going on out there that people don't understand, and they want to blame, you know, okay, our government's to blame, and they are partially to blame, but the farmers just can't keep up. It's not their fault. You know, you're going to say, okay, well, we're taking all the immigrants off the street. Well, before the Biden administration, we had, you know, plenty of immigrants to pick these crops. But the problem was E-Verify, a lot of these government regulations that did come out and stop them from hiring immigrant pickers. I mean, I heard stories from my father, you know, and then other stories that you heard about from Cesar Chavez and everyone else in the old days, how, you know, they were picking for almost nothing. And they would start at the crack of dawn and go into the nighttime, and they would have blisters on their hands and their backs were hurting. Now, we have AI to take care of that. But in the meantime, those tractors are costing $100, $200, $500,000. Are they picking more efficiently? Yes, they are. It's a lot easier, a lot better. But it costs money, a lot of money. And that's where these farms go into debt, is they cannot cover these costs of these tractors and the innovation of moving into the future. They're barely making it as it is. And it just takes a bigger story, and it just keeps rolling down the street more and more and more, that, you know, how much food is left on the ground. And we can get into that later on, you know, but, you know, again, you got to feel sorry for the farmers that are really trying to make it. They've had this land for generations, from their grandfather to their father to their father. And the land went from, let's just say 200 acres down to 100 acres, down to 50 acres. You know, how many farmers are growing what? And then they're competing with other countries. So if you could see how big it is, we can't even grasp our heads around it to truly understand the problem.
But it sounds like it's a lot of what we're seeing in other parts of the economy where, I don't want to use this phrase, I'm going to put it this way. It's like the wrong parts of the market are compounding. Like, just as an example, people always, I mean, we've talked about it, right? With the hedge funds, like a hedge fund comes in and takes a successful business and finds ways to squeeze profit out of it at the expense of customers, or until the business just isn't really, like, it ends up losing money because it's not operating at the same level it should. And the difference here, it kind of sounds like, is there's a lot more of these variables that are working against the farmers, the distributors, like kind of everybody. Because I mean, the same way the farmers are feeling that pressure, it's really no different than those of us going to the grocery store, right? Like, people are buying less groceries, buying less things. It seems like the cost is going up, but most people aren't, like, where's that money going, I guess, is kind of what I'm kind of saying. You know, like, the farmers are feeling the same way. Like, it's not the farmers that are getting hurt. I mean, we know there's massive distributors, like the 2 beef packing companies in Brazil, for example. Like, they hold most of the money that's flowing through here. So is that kind of right to say, is like, we're all kind of dealing with this difficult financial reality of that's kind of grown. I guess I'm having a hard time kind of phrasing it. I feel like there's whole areas of the economy, and then there's these lines of people that have inserted themselves in between, And that's creating a lot of this compounding issue, because those are the guys that are just taking profit, but they're not contributing. Does that make sense?
It does, but you know, you got to look at corporate greed here. And if you look at it, you know, the stores, it's like 1/4 of the section is produce.
Mhm.
Then you have the meat section, but then you have all the ultra processed foods, from the freezer section to the canned goods to the pasta to the dressings and the cereal and grains, every piece of garbage that you put in your body. So when you go in and to buy tomatoes and onions and zucchini, and you feel like you're paying more for that than going down the road and buying a box of, you know, macaroni and cheese or a cup of noodles for 89 cents. What are people on a budget going to do? They're going to say, listen, I can buy a whole box, a case of, you know, a cup of noodles and eat that for lunch for $5 or $10 versus spending $20, $30, $40 on produce. Tomatoes at $2.89 a pound or $5 a pound, depending on the season or whatever's going on. Onions are so expensive. So they're saying making food at home not only is a burden on me because it's so expensive, that I can just put something in the microwave from the freezer and a $5 pizza versus getting chicken and meat at the store that costs you $25, $35 for a little package and feeding you for one day. And that's just the meat.
Yeah.
Buying the potatoes in the end. So, you know.
Well, if I could also just piggyback off that real quick, is that one thing I noticed, because you had pointed out the eggs thing, and I started to notice it with produce too. When I buy anything organic or like we were talking about, was it pasture raised eggs? I didn't realize that when I buy the $9 eggs, they last twice as long as the store-bought eggs. And it's the same thing I noticed with the other thing. I don't think it's just something as strictly as organic either. It's like your choices when you are looking at these foods is, do you want something that's going to last 5 days in the fridge, or do you want to pay 40% more for something that'll last 2 weeks? Is kind of what it feels like. Like, I don't feel like I'm picking between quality anymore. I feel like I'm picking to degrees of freshness, if that makes sense. So it's not even just the fact of the packaging. It's like, it's still the same amount of lettuce, for example, right? Like, I can still only make, let's say, 3 salads with that lettuce. And I think that's the other part that makes it so complicated, because if I buy fresh fruits a lot, which most Americans do, right? I buy food for the week, not for the day like they do in Europe. Half my groceries have gone bad by the time I get around to eating half of them. So like, I'm having to change my buying habits, and I am balancing that honestly with I'm eating processed foods again, because like, honestly, I can't afford to sit there and just eat organic and make food all the time. So it's been tough finding that balance.
Well, the balance is very difficult, and I got to tell you right now that a majority of America buys that way, because they can store things and it's like they can store things inside their pantry versus the refrigerator. But the other thing is too, and this is a whole nother topic, is that what are they putting on the fruits and vegetables? What are they spraying with? You know, when you think about all the chemicals, all the pesticides that go on to these vegetables and fruits, you know, when you think about it, organic doesn't mean pesticide free.
Mm-hmm.
There's pesticides on it all the time. And when I was traveling around New York and other farms across the country, they had silos filled with things that said, you know, do not have any kind of fire next to this, or a match or a lighter or anything, because it was flammable. So when you're looking at all this, you really have to think about what you're putting in your body. What are we buying? How broken is the industry? And I keep saying it, and everyone keeps talking about, well, it's fine, it's fresh produce, it's good for you. But every time I turn around, they say raw spinach is the worst thing for you. You know, every time I turn around, when you're talking about eating sushi, they say it has so many parasites, it's the worst thing for you. So everything you eat, they talk about it, and we really have to come down with real actual facts. And I'm sorry to say, but the government isn't releasing that. They're not talking about this. The farmers are out of business if they start talking about it. So you're looking at from the GMOs to all the different types of pesticides that they put in it. This is going everything from our cows to the chickens to the fish to the produce. Now, all these are part of the system that's broken, the system that all this stuff to do, these chemicals, everything, it costs money.
Yeah.
And again, like I mentioned, it's starting getting worse around, and I'm not just going to just blame, the Biden administration. It came due to, putting sanctions on countries that's going to hurt us. And I understand why they want to put these sanctions on them, but think about it. Have a meeting about it. Maybe not put so many sanctions on them, but find a different way to go about this. Because that's where you're saying we don't care about the Americans and what they have to pay for, because we're not going to import it anymore from these other countries. That's where they hurt us. And the question is, are we ever going to go buy from them again?
Mm-hmm.
We have to think about what we're doing as a country so that we can survive and how it make food better. But it just seems that we're getting worse and worse at doing it because we want to put sanctions on somebody or we want to regulate something instead of fixing the problem. We're not fixing the problem. We're lining other people's pockets, I believe.
So I do think, though, because of the way people are spending right now, though, you do still have good options, but that's where I feel like there are, like I mentioned before, the compromises that are being made. Because even when I'm going shopping and I'm buying stuff, like just the other day we were looking at orange juice, and being a Floridian living in North Carolina, like it's kind of weird because I'm used to having more options or just options for orange juice. But it's funny because my girlfriend goes and picks up an orange juice, and I immediately, because she just sees like the added vitamin whatever for it. And then I look at the back of it and I'm like, I don't recognize a couple of these words, or this, I think one of them had phosphate in it. And then I go and I look at Florida orange juice. I think that's the brand, is Florida orange juice. And there's literally one or two ingredients. It's literally like orange juice and something else. It wasn't even a preservative. It's something simple. But it was just kind of crazy because it's just like, you can buy this other orange juice, but to our point, it's a lot more expensive, right? And I think that's what's been, like, for a while I was spiraling. I was like, oh my God, everything is poison. But when I started to learn more about like what chemicals are and how they get graded into food. But what sucks is like how deep I had to go down the rabbit hole to understand and make compromises. Like I'll eat stuff with guar gum in it now because I understand guar gum is natural, And honestly, something with one or two ingredients in guar gum is way healthier than the thing that has 10 different types of sugar that I don't recognize in it, like something else in it. So,
well, the old saying is if your grandma doesn't understand
mm-hmm.
the ingredients, or your great grandmother, you don't buy it. And to be honest with you, are they labeling it as sugar, or they're just giving you the sugar amount of sugar, grams per ounce?
Yeah.
And a lot of times it isn't sugar, it's fructose, it's glucose, and it's concentrate.
Yeah.
And all that stuff is bad for you. I do go look for freshly squeezed or try to squeeze my own orange juice. It's very expensive. Who can afford $15 for a couple quarts of orange juice? It's very expensive to buy that type. Yeah, but you're trading your healthcare. So it's healthcare versus going to the doctors later on in life because you put so much fructose and seed oils into your body because you're not eating, and you think that you're eating better because you're drinking orange juice. But if it's from concentrate, it's not good. Apple juice from concentrate is not good. Basically, you're boiling the product, you're putting the fructose in, and you're taking out the vitamins and nutrients out of it. Does you no good. And you're drinking pure sugar. And that's why America is becoming more and more obese. We don't look at what we're eating and drinking. But bottom line, if you paid a little more attention, you change your lifestyle, and little by little, it will get better. Just stop buying the ultra processed foods. And again, all this stuff started back in the Nixon era. That was part of, getting him elected, affordable food. And then the ultra processed just started speeding its way up one day at a time. And it started over 100 years ago. That's when we started getting to the Crisco and the oils and everything else. But it got worse and worse. And now they're talking with scientists. They're doing all kinds of things, working with the big pharma companies. It's all tied in. And the worst part about the farming now, they're being consolidated. They're corporate farms now.
Yeah.
So if you thought about private farming and owning your own farm, they all belong to a corporation. And that's what's making it harder for them. Because they got to regulate and tell them everything. You're doing this, X, Y, and Z. You got to make your costs cheaper. You know, you got to have this amount of crops to come in every day. And that's the problem.
I don't want to move too far away from fertilizer, but do you also feel like something I feel like I'm seeing a lot lately too is now we have the other side, right? Where people are trying to be super healthy, educate on chemicals and stuff like that, but it's still scaring people to a crazy point. And I say that because something I had to do for myself to change my health was focusing more on, for example, like eating more beans. Like I'm the kind of person that was focusing on eating more veggies for sure, but like beans are something that offer protein, fiber, and something I saw recently is that so many people are trying to eat healthy, but they're missing the essentials like eating something like fiber. So do you feel like part of where people are getting pulled apart is on one side, they have this more affordable food they can get, and especially for larger families, so you're going to go a little bit cheaper if you have to feed a lot of people. But then on the other side, people are kind of spiraling because they're like, everything is poison, everything is bad. But really, there is a spot in the middle for people to kind of eat a balanced diet. And yeah, it's more expensive than it was 5 years ago, but you also don't have to break the bank buying like the super fancy organic chicken. You can buy a slightly better chicken. It's better than buying like bottom of the barrel stuff.
You have to understand what you're eating. Again, the big issue right now, and I'm not trying to be negative. People might say, well, this sounds negative. A lot of people ask me about things that I'm writing sometimes. It just sounds negative. No, it's basically to poke you in the eye and make you wake up. Mm-hmm. Have an understanding of what's being sold to you out there, what's really happening. And you mentioned about your produce going bad right away, but for the most part, the produce lasts sometimes 2-3 weeks, even a month. You know, I live by myself and I buy produce all the time, but there's a lot of times I don't cook it. It just sits there for a month and it's still good. The bell peppers don't go rotten for a month. The carrots don't go rotten, and the potatoes, they're fine. And the same thing with chicken. When I was growing up, the chicken breasts within 3 days were rotten. You know, now they're gas flushed, they're injected. So when you really think about it, our produce is lasting longer. You know, it's the pesticides, it is the fertilizer, it's the stuff that they're putting in, the GMOs. It's everything that we're eating. And, you know, is it going to change? This is one of the least talked about problems out there. You know, the produce that's being left on the land every day, that's not being picked. All these problems are out there and no one talks about it. You never see it in the news. It's not a controversy. Okay, so where are we going at in the future to make it better? The number one thing that the Americans or anyone in this world for that matter, you know, that we have to do is consume food every day.
Yeah.
So when we have a problem that just keeps on escalating, getting bigger and bigger, and no one's addressing it, is it because of the corporate greed? Is it because they want to make more money? It's cheaper to make, cheaper to produce. And that's where we're going, because basically, you know, growing up, you would see all these different types of vegetables out there in the produce market, and the seasons changed. I would see gold bar zucchini, Kentucky green beans. I don't even know if anyone knows what those are, but those were around in the 80s and 90s. They were thicker, fatter green bean. There were yellow ones. There was these white ones with purple specks. You know, they had purple green beans. They had all kinds of different green beans out there that I never see. Maybe that you might see them in the South, in Louisiana, New Orleans, but I haven't seen them out there for years. All different types of squashes. There's so many different types of varieties of produce out there that you wouldn't believe it, but you never see it on a plate in a restaurant. You don't see it in your kitchen supermarket.
Doesn't have to do with the incentives behind it all, though, because I mean, I think one of the big things that everyone's feeling the pressure of is, I like to poke fun at fiduciary responsibility, right? Like you have a fiduciary responsibility in any company to make sure your investors are making money. So if you're constantly trying to maximize the bottom line, even if you're doing everything right, but if you have a 10% average return year over year, you know what I mean? Like there's this hunger for like more and more and more. So doesn't that drive away a lot of the uniqueness that you're talking about, right? Because it's like, okay, well, we rather just have one type of green bean that makes us more and more money every year than offer 5 different kinds of green beans, which cost more money to maintain across the board. So it doesn't.
You're 100% right on that. And because, you know, these supermarkets basically have a very small profit margin. You're
Well,
talking from 12 to 16% if lucky, if lucky.
it's not just supermarkets, right? Like we've talked about the food fraud with restaurants, and though I don't think there's like a ton of restaurants out there that are purposely like what's the word, misleading people. Like we all know that I was watching a video about a couple different pizza companies that are all chains, right? And they all started buying cheese from the same guy because he figured out a way to take mozzarella, push out all that moisturizer, and create like this unique type of cheese. It's just super processed cheese. But the reason they do it is so profitable. And the funniest part too is like, I'm just gonna say it's Domino's. We'll strike it out if it gets us in trouble. But the point being is like, Domino's is a perfect example where like they just need you to buy the pizza more than the other shop. So they'll do a buy one get one free or a 50% off pizza because they can take a loss, because their goal is to do what Uber did, take out and completely cut out all of your competition. And then once you are the baseline that everyone goes to, start raising prices. So it's crazy because it's not really even about quality at that point. It's just about getting people to buy your pizza and then locking in that baseline price. So like, I guess where I'm going with this is like, I feel like we see restaurants doing a lot too, because it's not just them, even the small mom and pop guys, right? Like they only get what, say, Cisco or US Food gives them these options. So do you see that as like a big conflict for all of food in the US, where it's like sometimes profit takes precedence over not just quality, but like even the right thing to do when it comes to food? Like saying you're giving them lobster when you're giving a Langostina, for example.
And you're right. It goes right back down to the, you know, what I mentioned a while ago. It's corporate greed. You know, corporations taking over, the BlackRocks, the Vanguards, you know, everyone that has their hand in the honeypot there. Cisco is a part of it. US Foods is a part of it. They're all connected. Walmart's a part of it. They're not going to, they're not going to change what they buy, and they're going to fool you, because what they're just going to do is say, let's say they have a Del Monte frozen product in the freezer, and you're going to say, I'm not going to buy Del Monte. I feel like I heard things bad about them, but I'm going to go get the local brand, the Walmart brand. And basically, Del Monte is producing that too. Yeah. So they're going to produce the off brands. They're going to call it farm fresh. They're going to call everything. It just doesn't change. You're still buying it, and it might be 10 cents cheaper, but the marketing and packaging is cheaper. So it's all one way. No matter what, they're going to get their money. Unfortunately, it's hurting, you know, the American people, our health wise, our pocket wise, and, you know, no one knows what to buy anymore, how to eat healthy. And they're not eating healthy. I mean, everything you buy has seed oils in it, and it's all garbage and junk for you. And because they can't afford to buy groceries anymore, like I mentioned before, they're going right back to buying the ultra processed foods because it is cheaper. You know, again, why does chicken last a week in your refrigerator or 14 days for that matter? It shouldn't. You know, if you notice, when you go to the fast food restaurants, in the old days, you could get food poisoning. You had all these problems sometimes reporting to the health inspector. People would call up, said that fish fillet or that burger made me sick. That chicken sandwich made me sick. No one calls about food poisoning anymore.
Well, do you think it's because restaurants have gotten better though? Like, have they actually gotten better at handling food, or is it because the food has changed?
Hell, listen, I traveled across the United States, and I would go in to help restaurants out constantly. And like I mentioned to you before, I went to New Hampshire, Conway. It was a hotel out there in Conway. It was the White Mountain Hotel. And the minute I walked into that walk-in, they had a tub of seafood, and they have different pans with scallops and you know, cod and salmon and everything else. And they'd ice it down, obviously, because they're trying to do the right thing. But no one would change the ice when it melted. So everything just fell together and mixed and cross-contaminated. They would still go in there and get their fish, but it was being cross-contaminated. And they had chicken on the floor, just sitting there in a box. No dates, no nothing, not knowing when it came in, not rotating it. The same thing with the meat. So the new meat would come in, and they would just want to put everything off the floor and get it off, you know, put it on the shelf. So the new meat would come on top of the old meat. I'd walk into the walk-in freezers. Some of that stuff was 3 or 4 years dated.
But so has restaurant standards fallen, and then why did they fall? And because I feel like there are restaurants that do separate themselves, obviously. Like when you pay for quality, you're getting quality, more high-end stuff, right? Like the right meat, like they're using all their food and stuff. So where did these standards fall, and why? It just seems like there's a divide. Am I wrong in saying that I see that? Like that standards have fallen for a large majority of them, but maybe they don't know better.
It comes down to the same problem that any other company that falls, a lack of management. It comes from the top.
Mhm.
If they're not putting systems in place and regulating everything they do, if they're not holding their vendors accountable, some of the vendors were bringing in food and the sausages had freezer burn all over it. And I would constantly call up and want to send it back and complain. And they would say, we're looking into it, but they never solved the problem. It goes on from several levels, what you eat in a restaurant. It's almost too scary to say what's good and what's not. Who's buying what? Where's it coming from? Because everyone's trying to make their bucks, and they're going to say, okay, to the vendors, I want you to give me the best deal. Now, when you go across the United States and you go to all these restaurants, a majority of the food on the menu, especially the appetizers, are all frozen and deep fried. Lack of labor, usually product cost makes it a lot easier to get that done. The other piece is when you go for the seafood section, what is there normally? Tilapia, salmon, and tilapia is slowly starting to disappear, by the way, but for sure salmon and ahi tuna. You'll see shrimp and clams or mussels because those are the cheapest. You might see bronzino in a higher end restaurant and sea bass.
Mm.
But you don't see John Dory anymore, orange roughy, opa, opaka. You don't see any of that gourmet fish that we usually get all the time. The really buttery, flaky white fish. And if you see salmon or Dover sole, it's a fortune. Because again, it's all cookie cutter. Every time you go to the supermarkets, they're all owned by the same corporations across the United States. So Tom, Vaughn's, Albertsons, Stop and Shop in New York. So when you look at everything across the country, Hannaford's, they're all buying and selling the same thing. You don't have any innovation. So when you were talking about the different, not having that different style produce, the seasonal produce, you were exactly right. But there has to be places where farmers markets where you can go and get that stuff. But even that's rare anymore. And when you're looking at it, look at Driscoll strawberries. I used to live, I was working in Santa Cruz, California, and the farmers markets were great out there because you're right next to Gilroy and Salinas, where some of the biggest farmers and crops were for California. Garlic Town, Strawberry Town, Watsonville, Driscoll strawberries had the biggest strawberry farms. And now they're reporting all over the news on social media that the Driscoll strawberries are the worst for you. They're the most contaminated thing you could eat. Now, allegedly, and I'm not one person to say that this is true or not true, but I lived there, and Driscoll strawberries were the greatest thing to buy and have and eat. But again, we're picking produce so early, vitamins, nutrients, and sugars aren't able to develop.
I do feel like part of what you're saying though too, because I feel like it's not just management, because it seems like the standards have fallen in the sense that like restaurants, grocery stores, and customers have all lowered their standards to get better stuff. And I say that because like growing up fishing, I learned to fillet my own fish by myself because I didn't really I had people that fished in my family, but when I actually started filleting fish, it was just a friend and I figuring it out kind of thing. And I bring that up to say that like when I look at a fish, like it doesn't bother me to see where it comes from. In fact, I like to see where it comes from, which when I read that book, Real Food, Fake Food, he said that's actually an essential part of picking fish. And I say that because it's funny too when I start thinking about produce and start seeing produce and like to your point, you start understanding how it's grown and that. And it just seems like all those standards have become more lax. You know what I mean? Like in terms of like a grocery store, we'll start taking produce from 3 states away because they don't care about the freshness. It's not that they don't care, but like that's what people are willing to buy at or whatever. And then it got a little bit deeper when you started to see things like I've seen videos where people said if you flush your strawberries with baking powder, I think it flushes all the bugs out. But it's like, no, people always just ate that. And we have this sanitized mindset too. So it just feels like there's a lot of conflicting stuff where like our disconnection to like, this is what food is really like. And then the sanitized mindset and then willing to compromise for lower price. Like this has created this environment where companies are incentivized to like, hey, let's just get them out. Let's just get them what they're willing to buy rather than being like, hey, we got to maintain this quality or people are going to stop buying. Because that's what I feel like happened with restaurants and grocery stores. Like, even though people want better options, they don't really have that impact with their dollar anymore. You know, like if everyone stopped buying a kind of chicken, they would just stop offering that chicken. They wouldn't be like, oh, we need to find a better provider right now because that's not available for whatever reason.
That's because you eat with your eyes. So
Yeah.
when you go to the produce market, the tomatoes are so beautiful, so red, and they do have a ripening box in most produce places, warehouses. But that tomato has so much different types of pesticides, and it's been washed through a waxing coating that whatever's on it, you're eating it. Even if you wash it, you're not getting rid of it. How many times do you get the tomatoes and they're so beautiful and you can see all that wax? You know, in Italy, they call something, you know, blanching tomatoes. They do a lot with their foods. And what they do is they core them and cut a cross on them. And then in boiling hot water with a little salt, they just drop them in for about 10, 20 seconds. They pull them out, pull the skin off. And then they cut them into quarters and take the seeds and then dice them up. And they cook that way. It makes bruschetta better. It makes pastas better. It takes your food to a whole different level when you do that process. And that's what I do. I don't use the skin of the tomato. But I know that it's still affected with pesticides. But if anything, I'm not eating that wax. I peel my zucchini. There's so much wax on it. Apples. What do you have to do if you're making candy apples nowadays? You have to pull the skin off. You know, you got to get that wax off there. You got to heat them up. So it's just so much stuff that we're putting into our produce because you eat with your eyes. When you go in there, look at these beautiful apples, look at these peaches and nectarines, everything you're buying. These tomatoes look beautiful. Look at them. They're vine ripe. So they'll manipulate you. And that's what they do to buying that produce. You know, and again, it's all these corporations, and it's not the supermarket manager trying to hit their bottom line. It's their regulations coming from corporate. If they don't hit their bottom lines, well, they're fired. They're out of there. Yeah. They have no choice. Hit those bottom line. It's not the same anymore. When you used to go into a supermarket, they always had a butchery. You remember? You'd always hear the band when you're growing up. You'd hear that saw band going. They were cutting fresh meat. You know, now they get the meat. It's pre-cut. They just package it. And then they probably, once it gets so much of a date, they take it to the back and they repackage it and put a new date on it. From what I understand, allegedly.
I heard they turn it into pre-made food. All pre-made food is made with close to expiration meats.
Correct. And I would never, ever buy marinated food. Right there. No way. Because it doesn't move fast enough. Yeah. And I don't trust it. So again, when it comes back to the farms, you know, with all this stuff that's going on right now, it just goes from one level to another level to another level. So you're looking at the raising cattle, you're raising chickens, and it just starts. And people don't understand our food chain and how extensive. They just want to go in, get it, and get out. Growing up, we would go straight to the butcher. There would be a shack on the corner, and we'd go right in there, and they had every type of fresh meat. But now you see everything the same thing. New York strip, ribeyes, T-bones. You know, you'll see the same meat, chuck roast, bottom round. But there's a lot more different types of meat, such as a tri-tip and a hanger steak and all kinds of other meats that you don't see out there.
Well, even when they're super expensive. I remember I tried beef heart a couple of times because when I was in Greece, I tried some different kinds of offal. Offal is how you say it, the organ meat stuff. And so like I literally just saw some the other day and we just looked because it's just been a while. And I was like, oh, it's usually like $2 or $3. It's like $9 for beef heart. It's, you know, if you want to go and get like the bone, or not even the bones, the oxtail was the craziest one. Oxtail that used to cost like $6 for 6 or 7 of them now costs like $24 or $28 for 6 of them. I'm just like, is this crazy? Like they found a way to even take some of the cheapest cuts and make it super expensive somehow. So even when you do have them, they're constant because they don't. Sorry.
Cow tongue at Costco, I see. I mean, this whole year I was looking every time I went there and I say, oh wow, they have cow tongue, $50. I'm like, I'm not paying $50 for a cow tongue when we used to get it for $5 growing up because nobody wanted to. There was so many cuts of meat in the 80s and 90s that people didn't pay attention to. Even hominy, not hominy. I mean, I'm sorry. You know, the tripe. You know, the belly of the pig, and tripe was dirt cheap. because all the Hispanics would make their pozole and menudo with it.
Yeah.
And now you can't touch it. It's so expensive. You're paying 20, 30, 40 bucks for a couple pieces of flap. And you know, shoulder clod is probably one of the toughest pieces of meat out there. And that was dirt cheap. You'd get it for $1.69 a pound if lucky. But you would braise it for 4 hours. So it's shred. It'd be the best meat to shred and make some kind of Yankee pot roast or something. Now you can't find it. And if you do, it's an arm and a leg. Top sirloin in the 90s. I was paying in the early 90s $2.14 for top sirloin, because no one knew what it was. They weren't cooking with it. They weren't using it. So I'd get it cheap, which is the easiest steak to cook and sell.
I think it also
No, go ahead.
I think it gets an exotic price tag though too, because that's what I kind of saw with the things like oxtail and some of the other stuff. Like I said, there was brisket. The funniest story is I had no idea that brisket used to be considered like a garbage cut. Like it was super cheap because no one wanted to cook it. And I guess this is before like it got really big in barbecue. So the reason why I took off in barbecue is because someone figured out if you slow cook it for like 24 hours or more, you know, it goes from super sinewy, not a great cut, to being like a super tender, juicy cut. And now if you go to the grocery store, I mean, I don't know, it was like maybe 20 years ago, but like even going now, it's like insane seeing some of the price on that stuff where it's like I don't know, it feels like there's a luxury tax almost on a lot of these things that used to just be like scrap parts. I'm like, oh, people found a way to make something they really like with this. We need to make sure that we're making a good cut of that. So,
and I'm not sure if it was the Americans that figured it out too late, but the Asians have been using it for decades.
Yeah.
Brisket, they boiled it. They put it in their soup bowls.
I think that's why tripe and stuff got back. Like with pho, I always get tripe and what's this called? The bone, not the gooey stuff. Tendon. I always get tripe and tendon in mine, you know, but I would never have tried that before.
No. And a lot of times when you went to these Asian restaurants when you were younger, you had no idea what you were eating. You just ate it.
Yeah.
Because there was no name for it. But basically, the system isn't getting fixed because the corporations aren't going to allow it to get fixed. And this is the reason why we have all these problems with the farms. And again, they have to consolidate. They're going to corporate. And when you really think about it, the land prices and the property taxes is one of the biggest things. It's not just one problem. There's just, like I mentioned before, it's several problems.
Yeah.
So again, labor costs for picking, that's going to get fixed soon, you know, with all the AI and automated machines. But a corporation is going to have to invest into them. And those people that cannot invest into those types of AI and move ahead away from that labor, they're just going to lose their farms. So
I think it's already happening. That's what I'm hearing already.
It's happening now. So, and this brings us to the other thing that, again, as I mentioned, all this is some of the least stuff ever discussed, but one of the things that they really hardly discuss right now is how much food is left on the farm. Okay, so they don't really have an exact amount, but you know, the research shows about 10 million tons of specialty crops, fruits and vegetables left on the ground every year. Okay, and they lose up to 6 billion pounds of crops annually. You know, that says a lot. You know, so if your economy is saying if we could pick all this and put this on the table, would produce prices still be the same? You got to ask yourself that. Do they want it that way? Why is it left on the ground? Was it because they can't find the labor to pick it?
Could be quality too, or has that ever come up that it's maybe a quality issue where there's nothing wrong with it, but it just isn't sellable?
No. I mean, I don't think that's the problem. I mean, that's just way too much food. If there was a quality problem, maybe 10% of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these farmers, they've been doing this for a long time, and every peach, every onion, every piece of lettuce counts. They just clean it. And whatever they don't do, think about it. They're going to put it into a tomato sauce or a ketchup or something that they're going to process. It's not, they don't care. That stuff is going into a machine. They're going to utilize it one way or the other. So yes, we have labor. We have a huge labor problem. So we're hoping that AI will solve for a lot of this. And, but in the meantime, when you really think about it, when you think about the starving people around the world and everything else, that doesn't seem to be a concern of ours. Or they're talking about all these jobs out there, the need for pickers, but there's so much unemployment out there, but nobody wants to go out there and pick.
Because I actually kind of see it as a different issue, because I feel like there's this weird in between stage happening where I think AI's, I know we've talked about before, I think AI is being oversold for what it is. I don't think that the scalability is there. Like, to your point, even if there was machines readily available, I don't think anyone can really afford the cost right now. And I think the other part of it is that they're not willing to, from the like, I don't know much about the pickers, but I know from a lot of employee stuff, like, there's a lot of protecting of margin happening, right? Where like everyone's like, oh, I need to make a certain amount of money as a business owner. And so they're not, I mean, I don't know how to say it other than it feels like some of these businesses are becoming not viable, in the sense that, like, if you can't afford to pay pickers a certain amount to go out there and pick, and I say it because we've seen it over the last, I don't know if it's been 5 years or longer, but that perfect example happened in California where they didn't hire a bunch of people from another country. Those guys had visas, but or not, whatever it was. But the thing is, they tried to hire Americans in California. I think they went up to like $30 an hour, and they almost lost 60% of their crops, because I think they ended up losing 30. But like, it was an insane number. I'm just throwing numbers out. But the point being is they literally had to take a bunch of buses sponsored by the California government to go down and pick up basically a workforce in Mexico, bring them back, pick, and then deliver them back again. Because they basically were like, hey, we tried to hire American. You gave us incentives to hire American, but we can't get Americans to do it. Like, it has nothing to do with money either. They just don't want to be out there and work. And I say that because Florida has that too. Like, the guys that pick the watermelons, like, they're all there on visas. A lot of the farmers are guys who voted for Republicans and stuff. Like, they want to protect that. They want things to go the way that the Republican Party wants it. And even they're saying, they're like, look, like, we've tried to hire local Floridians, but no one's going to do it. That's why we get these guys. They're good workers, and we can afford to hire them. And that's how watermelons get all over, the state of Florida and wherever else they go.
Excuse me. I think it's a little more, I think it's a little more complicated than that, because people think that, okay, pay them higher wages. You can afford to pay them higher wages. No, the costs of picking, a case of lettuce, the profitability is so small, the margin is so small that it's not like the farmers can go and tell them, okay, since I have to raise prices for my labor, now I got to raise prices for lettuce. They can't, because then the produce markets that sell it and distribute it, then the supermarkets that sell it, it goes through too many hands that they could only get a certain price for that case of lettuce. So these people that go out there and want $30 an hour, they can't do it. And then you got to think about it. In the old days, an immigrant worker picking would pick 3, 4, 5 times as much as an American that just went and applied for a job, said, I'm going to try this for a day. And they do it, and they realize their back hurts and they can't do it. And then they walk off the job. So these are the problems, is that the Americans, people that want work, don't want to do that work because it's too hard. And the things that require hand picking are such items as strawberries, blueberries, you're talking about apples, grapes, lettuce, broccoli, celery, peaches, citrus fruits. That stuff right now machines can't do. So again, I remember talking to my uncle, my father, and people, they grew up in the old days, and they were pickers. And they said it's probably one of the hardest jobs you have to do out there. Not a lot of people can do it. It's a lot of strain on your back. It's a lot of strain on your body. And there's no 8-hour day. A lot of times, 6 days a week.
Yeah.
It's one of the most hardest jobs out there. So yes, you take your hat off to these immigrants that did this. And sometimes, I don't know if they were even paying them by the hour. In some cases, they're paying them by the case and how many tons they picked that day. So that was their incentive to say, okay, I'm going to make more money if we get this entire crop picked, versus, okay, I'm going to take my time because I'm getting paid by the hour. I don't care.
See, this makes me wonder then, did the cost to distribute, market, and scale far outpace all the essential parts of how these businesses used to work? You know what I mean? Because, like, If before you could have anyone picking, right, and you could still afford to, as a farmer, grow all this stuff and then distribute it to a store, doesn't it kind of bring up the whole point that like we know that there's a lot more money going into marketing, there's a lot bigger relationships that are narrowing down the kind of options that we have. So does it come down to the point that marketing and selling is far outpacing the business itself and the people it's hiring to operate?
Well, these are the hidden costs to the consumer that people don't realize. So every time we don't go and pick those crops, the farmers lose revenue. So, and the fixed costs remain the same. So what happens? The supply decreases, food prices increase, and then more produce is imported. This is the chain effect of what happens out there. People don't understand. You just think the crop is just left on the ground and okay, well, let the farmers lose it. No one's going to lose in this. Somebody's going to still find a way to make their money. But it's basically now we're going overseas to get that produce from South America. And I don't want to hurt South America's, because sometimes they make $1 a day, $2, $5 a day, whatever they're getting paid, but it's not enough money, but they need that money to survive.
Well, because the other part though that it sounds like is coming up is like, imagine an entire economy full of De Beer diamond companies. You know what I mean? Where like every single thing they sell, they're artificially limiting like what's available. So it doesn't matter that they could actually offer more. They're purposely offering less to drive up the price. Like, how does that come into play with all this stuff? Because that's what affects restaurants and grocery stores and all the ways that we're eating, right? So like, how is this even happening in this economy where people are struggling?
Well, because it's just one, it's a chain effect. One thing leads to another. And again, if they're saying 60% of the produce is left in the ground, how's that going to affect everything? You know, and we want to go out there and blame the government for every little thing we're doing. Now, I know our government is involved into a lot of other things and they need to regulate things more, you know, from the FDA to the pesticides and everything else. But the farmers cannot survive with the insects and the animals and everything else if they eat their crops. They'll lose their crops. Okay. But then you have the big giant corporations that want to see a certain amount of money back from these farms every year. And then they have to produce for the people to eat. You know, so the chain of command and everything that comes down the pipeline just for these farmers to survive. If you sat down with them and had a beer with them and had a heart-to-heart with them, your head would spin. Because they're not just worried about the GMOs, the seeds that are GMOs, you know, planting, and the weather, the taxes on their property. And it just, the list just goes down and down and down, you know, and it just keeps adding up to what they have to produce and how they have to survive. Again, if the weather is bad or there's a drought for that matter. I think I even heard something about the water and how much water they can use and what time they can use it. Even the government is regulating that. You know, I got to research that a little bit more, but I've seen something on that. I've seen an article about that. It's not easy for them.
Yeah. Just sounds like between the government, corporations, and then the little guys, there's like this compounding competition with no collaboration. You know what I mean? Where everybody's watching their dollar, and this is kind of the result of that. And I don't mean that as a political thing. It feels like, to your point, the buck keeps getting passed until it hits the consumer, and that buck is starting to multiply to a point that like consumers can't support it with their income either as a whole. I don't mean any individual groups. And so that's now pushing back on these companies who, you know, they're still trying to find ways to be profitable and stay open and stuff like that. So it kind of feels like a slow motion train crash when I mean, we're not even covering half the topics that probably are included in all this. And it just feels like a slow motion train crash to a certain degree.
Oh, you kidding? When we were growing up, produce was the best thing you could buy because you knew you could always eat vegetables, make vegetable soup, and it was healthy for you. It was good for you. And you could go with $5, get onions, celery, carrots, and some other things in produce for $5. You'd have a whole bag of produce for $5. and you were able to eat. That was the one thing that no matter what, if you didn't have money for meat, you could eat. Okay. Now it's a fortune to buy any kind of produce, to make anything. I'm trying to make soup and it still costs me $20.
Yeah.
You know, and the amount of pesticides that go on to all these farms and this produce, you know how many pounds of pesticides go onto these produce farms annually in the United States? 1 billion pounds of pesticide. Everything from weed control, insect control, disease control. These are chemicals that go on your crops. 1 billion pounds per year.
Wow.
These facts are not made up. I mean, you have to really think about, again, these pesticides don't go away just because you dust them off, you wash them with water.
Mhm.
It's like when you put suntan lotion on your body, it's like you're rubbing it into your skin. You're rubbing chemicals into your body. You're consuming this stuff. So again, what are the solutions to this in the future? Are we going to, is there a solution to make it better? Organic style pesticides? Is it just some kind of soap that's organic, that's not, something that's going to affect us? And honestly, they say they don't have the research to tell you how this is going to affect us. I think they do.
I don't think there's been enough time for some of the things that they've been coming up with. I mean, it's kind of like aspartame. Like they didn't really know the original effects. I mean, even with protein, only in the last 10 years that we really recognized the, effects since the 80s of how protein and other supplements affect.
Correct.
So I do think time is one of those elements that makes this difficult, because how do you feed people? How do you compete while not really knowing the true effects of a lot of this stuff?
Well, you got to think about it too. Some pesticides were regulated, so a lot of those older pesticides are gone. So if they were going to do some studies on them, it's too late. Now you have the newer pesticides, so they'll regulate those. But just like everything else, is there a reason why? What's in those pesticides? Half the times you can't even read what's in them. You don't even know you don't even know how to pronounce it.
So I'm kind of curious, because obviously like restaurants are your thing. So on the restaurant side, how is this affecting restaurants in terms of like with all the different kind of products they're offering? Like, are there actually, because what makes me wonder is, you see a lot of like really cool hip restaurants, right? Where like they have local farms that they go and they get foods from, that's a limited supply and some of the stuff like that. Are most restaurants, are they tied down to like who their distributor is? And I ask because like, aren't there exclusivity agreements to like, hey, you can only use us, like for US Foods and Cisco, I'm thinking of, like, I'm sure they have certain restaurants where they're like, hey, you can only use us for this, this, and this. So does that limit restaurants in terms of their relationships with farmers and kind of a say in how the food being served in the restaurant is grown, that they maybe don't have a whole lot of control over?
There's not too many restaurants that can do that. Number one, it's very costly. Number two, it's only seasonal. So what are you going to do in the winter time? I mean, it's really difficult to run a farm to table style restaurant. And if they are, that's good for them, but there's only so much they can do. Now, I heard about these restaurants on Indian reservations where they use everything off the land, which is great, but it's a lot of food that people won't eat. They don't even know what it is. So you're not going to get a lot of business from it because people are going to be too afraid to go in there. People want to eat what they're comfortable in eeting.
It's like they go to McDonald's.
You're talking about maybe 1% of the restaurants that can do that out there. It's rare. It's very difficult to do. And I grow a lot of my own produce in my California home, but it's hard to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to keep up. My figs, every year in California, I have a huge fig tree, but the beetles come out and they're swarming around them and they're eating them. And, in all the other states, they have this bag at Home Depot where you can put it and it traps the beetles and keeps them away from your produce and stuff. But in California, they're illegal. So, you have to look at what works, what doesn't work, how are you going to make it work? And unfortunately, the problem still is out there, because just for that 1%, whether they can make it work or not, it's not going to help the rest of the country. And that's why the rest of the country is stuck to proteins and frozen food items and things in the freezer they could just deep fry, and the same product every day. But well, because the Cisco's of the world and US Foods and anyone out there that's a private business are still competing against the same food products. It's just, who can you get it cheaper from? It's the same thing. I was looking at somebody else other than Cisco and US Foods. I can't remember who they were. They're in New Hampshire. They were a pain in my butt. I couldn't stand them. They just kept coming, and they wanted our business so bad at the hotel that they just kept lowering their, giving me another % higher on a rebate every year for the food. So they went from 3%, then they went to 4%, they went to 5%, and they were like, why? So then they invited me to a food show, and I was testing all their meat, bacon, and sausage, and everything they had, and it was garbage. Their canned goods were garbage, and I'm just, okay, well, you're going to go with a smaller private company, but they're selling you the leftovers. And that's the same thing with produce. They have a number 1, a number 2, and even a number 3. The number 1 is the top of the line. It's beautiful, and you see all the carrots perfectly. Number 2s are usually older, and they're different types, and they're not as pretty, and they might have a little bit of brown on them. And number 3 is just like really on the last leg. But that's when you go to these supermarkets, when you go to some of these immigrant supermarkets, they're Asian supermarkets, and the old-fashioned little hole-in-the-wall Mexican supermarkets you see out there in little tiny poor areas, actually, where people don't make as much money. Those are where you get the number 2 and number 3 produce. You're not buying the best. And that's why they say, why is the produce here so much cheaper? Why can't I get a bag of produce for 10, 15 bucks when it costs me 40 or 50 somewhere else? Well, because you're buying number 2 or number 3, which is still good to eat.
Yeah.
I would still buy it. I buy that produce all the time. There's nothing wrong with it. Food is food, so, when it comes down to it, though, you got to look at what the farmers have to go through, and what we're putting on our table. And again, it's something that people are not talking about. They're not moving forward on. We're not trying to fix it. We're protesting the wrong things out there, telling you the truth. We're really not trying to fix a system that's completely broken and getting worse. But they want to go over there and fight for the immigrants to stay in our country. And I know this is political. I'm not trying to get political here at all. But they want to fight for all these people to stay in our country, but they're not taking a look at the problems where they're picking from, the jobs that are open. They're out there wasting their time protesting. If you cared about the United States and America and any other country and the immigrants, well, go show them that you're willing to do their job. Go out there and pick this produce. Let's find a better way to watch out for some of these pesticides. Just protest about the pesticides that are going to our food, because long-term reproductive problems, cancer, certain types of cancer, the neurological disorders, all this stuff is coming from this pesticides.
So that's why I think for the average person, it's easier to focus on like what we've been talking about doing, where it's like, how can I break up my focus? Like where I live, there's Food Lion, Publix, and Harris Teeter, which I had never heard of before, but it's owned by Kroger now, because Kroger owns so many companies that you wouldn't realize, even though they're not actually still as big as, say, a Walmart. But I bring it up because, I grew up in Florida around Publix, and honestly, the last 5 years, I've seen everyone talking about it. So it's not just me, but like the produce is garbage. It's terrible. And so I went to Food Lion, which it looked better, but then I go to Harris Teeter, which turns out it's a North Carolina chain, even though it's not owned by Kroger. And like, even though I don't love the way they do some of their vegetable stuff, like their onions come without the outer peel, but it's just like, oh, I go there because like it is all good produce. You know what I mean? So like, I find myself kind of breaking up now where I get certain things from certain places, because it's like, I can't just go to one store anymore. I have to break it up because of price and quality and all the different stuff like that. Like we even drove up to Chesapeake yesterday, or Virginia Beach, one of those two. And like we swung by a Whole Foods because the produce, we're on an island, so naturally we don't always get the best produce anyway. But it's like, oh, if we want good stuff, then we know if we go to Whole Foods, then at least the organic stuff is better. So I think where I was going with that is like, I feel like you have to start diversifying so much more to be aware of your health. Like we even have some like Spanish stores. Like I got a pineapple at Harris Teeter. Didn't know that when you pick the pineapple, it stops ripening the minute you pick it. So we left it on the counter figuring like, oh, it'll get ripe in a couple of days. It didn't. It just got moldy. So I was thinking, I was like, maybe I need to go to the Spanish store, because if they have things like pineapple, like to be honest, in the past and other places I lived, they have some of the better produce that's more tropical, you know? So I think that's where, if you're thinking about your food, like that's where you should be trying to go. Like for me, I switched from canned beans to dry beans, even though I wasn't eating that many beans. Like I just started making these small conscious changes to try to be more aware of my health and like how I can get better with my diet and stuff. And I think that's the big challenge, is like if you're trying to pay attention to what's going on, not just the political environment, just around you right now, it's really overwhelming, because like there's so much stuff wrong with everything. It's like, okay, what can I control right now? How can I improve my diet? What can I start cutting out that makes sense? Like I don't need soda. I can just make ginger beer at home. Yes, it's a silly fun thing I like to do, but it helped a lot to cut out soda, you know, and it's probiotic.
Yeah. So, you know, problem is it's our overall food production system.
Yeah.
It's just broken. And, you know, it goes from soil degradation.
Yeah.
And they got to replace that soil. Again, that's where the fertilizer comes in. It basically, that fertilizer, they're dependent on it. And without it, and with the cost of fertilizer going up and them having to source it other places, if they can't get it, that hurts the farms and the crops. Okay. The quality of the water. Okay. Where are they getting the water? Who's producing the what's in that? Okay. You hear all these stories about different chemicals in our water. So those chemicals are also going into our produce and into the soil. So when you think about it, it just goes on and on and on. And then after they pick it and they get it to the distribution center, heavy ultra processing goes into right after the harvest.
You just helped me think of some questions, because I know you've been to a lot of different farms and we've talked about farmers markets before. When it comes to things like fertilizer and water, like not everybody has an opportunity to go to a farm and see how it works. And even if they did, they might not recognize what's wrong, right? What are some questions, if I say I'm going to a farmer's market because I want to buy local, what are some questions I can be asking the person I'm buying my produce or whatever from, to make sure that, you know, it's of the quality that that I'm looking for? Because obviously if I go to a farmer's market, I'm assuming that I'm getting a better quality product and it's not using pesticides, or maybe I want to support local, whatever the reasons are. But like for you, what questions, if you couldn't visit a farm, would you ask someone in a farmer's market about their produce or beef or chicken?
Well, you have to ask, number one, they're not always going to tell you the truth. I've seen a lot of lies on these markets. I was just watching a video on a woman that watched another woman take, strawberries from a local brand and take the strawberries from Driscoll and transfer them into that box. So they weren't even a local farm's strawberries. So they're manipulating the food system. They're going out there to the farmers markets and selling it as a local farmers market. So double check the farms that you're buying from. The other thing is, I was in New York, a little past Long Island, near Hamptons. And there's a lot of farms out there on the way up. And I went to farms. I went to a cow farm, went to a chicken farm. I went to several different produce farms. And some of them are very nice. You can really tell the type of local produce at a farm when you're buying it, because they have different types of eggplants and carrots. You can still see the tops on the carrots. They're not picked and they're not cut. You still have the little flowery green leafy parts of it. And most of the produce is that way. It's not shiny either. There's no wax. You can see that it wasn't processed. It's obvious. Local farming, with berries too, and kumquats and everything else like that, you could taste it too. You could see that there's no wax. You could see that they weren't picked early. They're almost perfect, and you could taste the sweetness. You could even taste sugars and carrots because they weren't picked too early. Now, I went to some fresh produce stands where they had the farms, and the farms had their produce stand up there, so they're selling everything supposedly on the farm. But I walked that farm. I walked maybe 5 or 10 acres that day, and then I went to the front of the place, and all the produce they were selling looked processed. It had the wax on it, and not one piece of that produce that I looked at, from those bell peppers to the tomatoes and to the eggplants and everything else on there, I did not see any of it planted on that farm. So that they brought it from somewhere else. So sometimes you don't even have to ask the questions. You just have to pay attention and have common sense. It's making sure that no matter what, you're looking around, pay attention. So if you're at a farmer's market, look at the back, see what they brought the produce in. Look at the crates. Make sure they're not just reutilizing and buying off fake cartons to put their produce in. Always take a sample before you buy it. Don't buy with your eyes. Most of these legitimate farmers markets, if they're legitimate, they're going to give you a sample. And you'll be able to taste it right away. You're like, wow, this tastes so much better than this. And you'll see that there's a lack of processing. You'll see that there's no wax on it. You'll see that the zucchini is natural. But bottom line, Jake, as we wrap this up, it's real simple. Do one step at a time. Wash it thoroughly under running water. Sometimes people get home, think it's because they see the spray on the
Misters.
that it's been cleaned already. No, wash it thoroughly. What I do all the time is I peel my produce. If I'm going to eat an apple, I'm going to peel it. Every time I cook zucchini or yellow squash, I peel the skin off it. Besides, it cooks differently nowadays. In the old days, it cooked evenly. Nowadays, it's so, you'll see the mush of this zucchini and yellow squash, but you'll see it gets really tough and it's bitter. Same thing with the cucumber. Peel it. I don't understand these restaurants that serve you sliced cucumbers on your salad without peeling it. It's just too much wax on it. There's just too much pesticides and chemicals on it. And just eat a varied diet. Just learn to make those little changes. And people aren't doing. If you can buy local organic products when feasible, go out there and look for them. It doesn't hurt to get up on your day off an hour early and just do some research. And again, when I was out in San Francisco area, I would go to Napa Valley. Sometimes it's just too far, but Santa Cruz, there's all kinds of little places that I would go to and I'd find a really nice produce market. So I do my research. Sometimes there's really good local produce markets. Sometimes there's not, but it doesn't hurt. But unfortunately nowadays, these local produce markets, that you get, the farmers markets, they're expensive. Sometimes they're more expensive than the supermarkets. And in fact, growing up and doing this after culinary school for a living, I was always getting produce at a farmer's market a lot cheaper. But somehow they found the niche to say, okay, we're going to make even more money because we're going to sell it for double than what the supermarket is because it's organic and it's fresh. But come on. But think about it, Jake. You're not a distributor. You're basically taking it from the farm and selling it straight to consumers. But it's costing them more money now for me to buy it. It shouldn't. You cut off the middleman.
That's why it was funny comparing Chicago to New Mexico when I was trying different farmers markets. I know we talked about this a lot because Chicago is interesting because the farmers markets in the city were cool. You're getting farms from Wisconsin and Michigan and stuff like that. But most of the stuff at the farmers market wasn't even really produce. But then I go to New Mexico where it's just surrounded by farms, like just the areas, because there's so much space in between. And I actually did go through like all the different farms and everything, like their websites, just to see. To be honest, there wasn't a whole lot of information, so there's only so much I could really gather from it. But what was funny is like the eggs more expensive than the supermarket, but a lot of the veggies way cheaper. So it was funny because we would just get eggs because we're already there and it's local and you want to support local. But I don't know, it's just really interesting to see that big difference because also there's just so much different types of produce at the farmers market. And to be fair, I didn't know until a couple months after I was there the Santa Fe Farmers Market is considered one of the top in the country. So that was, I think, also a really big change. I didn't find one in Kansas. Right now I'm in OBX, so on an island you don't find much, but there's just farms around. You can go buy stuff right from the farm. But this actually brings me to like one last question I think is really important, because we asked like what customers can look for, and I think it's really overwhelming as someone that doesn't know too much about different, types of food and stuff. But something that some advice you could give that would help is like, what could someone, especially a farmer at a farmer's market or a restaurant serving something local, like what are some things they can be doing to help build some confidence, or kind of send the right signals to the customer, like, hey, this is legit? Like, what could they be doing to kind of show that transparency? Because like I said, the farms in Santa Fe were really cool, but like I didn't go to the farms. I had no way to tell like if this was legit or not, other than the fact that it just tasted good and it lasted a while.
To be honest with you, in the old days, early 90s, I'm going to say, it was so easy for me to get away. And even though I ran that restaurant, and I would get there at 6 a.m, and we were only a dinner house.
Mm-hmm.
It just opened for 5 o'clock, because I made everything from scratch and fresh. And I was able to go to the farmer's market. I had the time, once a week, twice a week, I could do it. Nowadays, we're in trouble. We have no labor. We have no qualified labor. We have no trained labor. We barely have management out there. So it's harder for anyone to get this done, because you're picking up the pieces, and the staff that you hire is a different generation. So they move slower. They have no training. You rotate them because they're playing musical chairs with other restaurants because they want a bigger paycheck. So, the best advice I can give to you to try to get this done is try not to do it on your own. Make sure you find a produce company that can do it for you. So when I was in San Francisco, up in the Bay Area, and working for Silicon Valley, I went to my produce vendors, and when I put them out to bid, I would say, okay, I want as much local produce as possible. I want as much organics. Because when you're thinking about Silicon Valley and the IT companies, they have billions of dollars that they blow on food service every year, and basically they want this. They're looking for this. So the produce vendors, I made it their job. You want to do business with me? It's your job now. You're going to go and find me some farmers. And they would actually bring me to the farms so I could get out there and walk the farm, see what they were growing. I'd find out the process so I could talk about it. So I wasn't just saying that, oh, we're selling local produce. No, I knew the farms. I knew the mushroom farms. I knew what they were growing, annually, locally, everything. The cheese farm, Cowgirl Creamery. So I knew who to go to, what to buy every time, because my produce vendor did all the research for me, brought them all in, brought me samples, cooked it, tried it, put it on the menu. That is absolutely the best way that you can get this done for the restaurants. Don't do the work yourself. Use your vendors. In the old days, we used vendors for everything. They did their work. If they were short on something, they would run to the local supermarket. They would go to Whole Foods and pick me up the bell peppers or the enoki mushrooms that I needed. But guess what? They're lazy now. You can't get a hold of them. They disappear. Say, okay, we're short today. We'll get it out to you tomorrow. They won't run. You have to make them work for their paycheck now. It's changed. Customer service is completely gone. But when you set up your deals and your contracts, you make sure you set that up, and you have to be firm about it. And the minute they mess up and they don't want to do it and they won't do it, provide it for you, they're out the door. You find somebody else.
So on the other side of that, because I guess to be fair to restaurants, especially the ones that want to serve local stuff, and this is me coming from Southwest Florida, and like I said, I'm in OBX now, and even Santa Fe, like there is a lot of emphasis on local foods. Like I've been really lucky in some of the places I've lived like that. So if that's the case, I mean, obviously they do mention like, hey, this is from this creamery or this is from this farm. What can farmers be doing as a better job? Because I think what we are seeing is like there are farmers out there doing TikToks and Instagram or whatever to kind of create some transparency. But if you are maybe a farm that's been around for a long time and has good relationships, what can they be doing to show people like, hey, we're putting in the work and this is the quality of food that we're producing? Like, what would you be looking for if you were looking at these farms?
You have to ask yourself, what is that farm in business for? Can they afford to do that? Honestly, in the old days, they could. Nowadays, they're short labor. They can't even pick. And, there are farms out there that are willing to, there are community farms. So they have community farms out there. If you look at them, where they set up a schedule for them to deliver produce to your home,
That's
or
cool.
you can actually go in there and plant some of your own crops, miniature ones, obviously. I did that, and I watched how they grew. There's people that plant only bell peppers or tomatoes or a mixture of, and they just section it off, and they pay a little fee to the farms, which is great because growing some of your produce at home if possible. So if you don't have the land, and people say, "Well, I live in a condo, live in a townhouse," find a community farm. Find them. They'll work with you. It's just harder for them to work with you, especially if big corporations are hurting them. But you got to think about how many farms out there. I know that when it comes to cow farms, there's about 700,000 cow farms out there across the U.S. Now, some of them may just have up to 30 cattle. Some might have, tens of thousands of cattle. It depends on the type of farm you have. There are big ones, small ones, medium ones. But we are getting better at it.
Mhm.
We are getting better at running the system, and that's due to AI. I just know that there's a lot of regulations out there, but I'm not sure how well our government is keeping up on maintaining all these regulations on the farmers.
I think it's nice. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. It's just too hard to truly understand every single day what's going on.
I think part of the thing that's really disappeared, or just a general statement, or people can take it how they want, is the whole accountability and self-regulation thing seems to really, it feels like there's a lot less of that. You know what I mean? Like, people are cutting corners if it's profitable when they can, is the general feeling everybody has. So I think that's kind of what you're hitting on, is that lack of self-policing seems to really be showing through on part of that quality standard drop.
Well, it's obvious because, as I was growing up, everything had the USDA mark on it, and they had an inspector at every butchery, and now I don't see the USDA.
Yeah.
Okay, where are they at? Okay, they used to go with a paintbrush and with the roller, and they would roll up on the cows. I don't know if you ever seen that growing up. The purple mark. You never seen a purple mark? Anyone of my time or earlier would always see a purple strip mark on the fat of their beef. That means it was USDA approved, because they would go down the cows after they're slaughtered, and they'd look at the marbling, and then they'd paint the cow. It was done. Yeah. So anyone that remembers from many years ago, that watches this, they're gonna say, "Hey, remember, that's true. I don't see it anymore." Yes, because everything's USDA choice now, and I'm like, no, not half this crap here is not the USDA choice. This is crap meat.
Everything's gold standard now.
Yeah. So, and there's not as many inspectors anymore because, again, they can't afford to pay them. But for the most part, they're going to say it's regulated, but it's not, because if they're doing processing afterwards, how are you going to hold somebody to a standard when you're not keeping up these standards, and when you're putting all these pesticides all over all our food, and there's just like at least an average of 3 to 4 different types of pesticides, not to talk about what's in the soil and then what's into the seeds. So, what standards are you going to hold against these farms, even though there's regulations on them? The farmers are saying you're contradicting yourself.
Yeah.
But they're in it to make some money, otherwise they lose their farms.
Somber note for us to end on.
Yeah. Again, grow your own.
Yeah.
Grow your own. Find a local farmer. The restaurants, listen, partner up with the right vendors. Just find the small little vendor that wants to make an impact and understands what your brand is. Okay, and that's what I'm going to leave it off at, because again, when you get excited and when you learn how to grow produce, and you first see your first zucchini growing, and then a few more, and every 2 days you go out there, 3 days, and you can cut another zucchini, you have more zucchini than you can handle. But it's great, because now you're eating fresh, and there's no process, there's no wax on it, and it's not as hard to grow as you think it is. You're just not doing it right. That's all.
So as a customer, look for chefs with green thumbs.
Yes. Again, everyone had a green thumb growing up. I mean, it's not hard to grow potatoes.
Yeah.
Just go to YouTube. There's so many things on growing fresh produce out there. And if you don't have the room, you could build these little boxes.
Yeah.
It's real cheap. A couple of pieces of plywood and mix some soil with some fertilizer and then just plant.
Mhm.
Put a couple potatoes already inside of that soil and you'll start to see them sprout. So you don't have to go spend all this money on these seeds. But you can go online to Amazon or anywhere else and buy organic seeds. Check them out first and make sure that they are organic. And you'll grow some really great produce. And be careful, just don't stick them way down deep inside the produce. It's usually 1/4 of an inch. Just lightly pat it. So it's understanding how to build crops, and how to, how to farm. But once you learn, you get better and better at it every year. Don't give up. That's all I have to say. It's an exciting thing. If I was home right now in my California home, I could show you pictures of the figs right now and the pomegranates. I've been growing a Granny Smith apple tree for over 18 years. And it's just the amount of apples I get every year. And you know how proud it is to go out there, every couple of weeks or every couple of months and pick your apples, pick your pomegranates. And then if what I did last year, because I had so many pomegranates, I went home real quick to grab all my produce off the trees. And what I did with the pomegranates, I take them, I cut them, I put all the seeds in baggies and freeze them. And then the year pomegranate desserts or pomegranate lemonade. I do the same thing with tomatoes. I'll roast them or make jar them up and make fresh tomato sauce. The apples, I peel them, slice them, freeze them. There's so many different things you can do and just pull them out during the year.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why homesteading's starting to take off again, because it's bringing back all that, magic of what this stuff can do with natural preservation.
Yes, and I think it's probably a better food show now than watching these food shows that are just getting tiring and people trying to compete against each other and destroy each other's foods. Why not instead have a farmer that goes from crop to crop, picks the food and shows you how to ferment it, how to do what I just told you. A simple thing of showing you how to dry out your oregano and put it in a jar and put it in the refrigerator. My bushels of oregano, bushels of rosemary at home. I have tons of oregano, rosemary, cilantro I grow annually. I'm growing berries right now. I have a plum tree. I mean, every time I turn around, I need something. It's great to go outside when I'm cooking and chop my rosemary and come back in and rinse it off and put it in my food.
Yeah.
You know how much money I save? I don't have to go spend $5 at the store. That's $5.
Some of those things are resilient. My mom had a rosemary bush and that thing got massive. We always had way too much rosemary and it doesn't die.
No, it doesn't. The one thing I don't suggest growing is bananas. I grew up with a banana tree. You have one banana tree, you're gonna have a million.
Well, actually pineapple, well, never mind. You can't do that with pineapples either. I think it's actually illegal to try to regrow pineapples in Florida. But people I knew growing up would secretly be growing. I have a friend that has 15 pineapple plants in his yard.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would never complain. I get tired of bananas, but I don't get tired of pineapple.
Yeah.
From making smoothies to just to eat it every day fresh in your food. I mean, it just, ambrosia salad with it, just great.
Just can't eat too much of it or hurt your mouth.
No. But I think that's a cure for anything that bacteria that you would have in your mouth. It's probably better than using toothpaste.
Yeah. Except then you have to protect your teeth after, because it would just eat through your enamel.
Very true. You're right. Well, they're doing it with coffee, so pineapple I think is safer.